I think the president has always been in a position where it's his to lose, based on he's bringing a sort of a disruptive force into what would be called political norms. I do not see anybody in the Democratic primary races today that is enough in the center where I believe most of the voters are. If you take a snapshot today, I don't think that group is capable of beating Donald Trump, despite what the polls say.
That's the Black Entertainment Television founder, Robert Johnson, speaking earlier today, saying the 2020 election is Trump's to lose. Doesn't think anyone in the Democratic field can beat the president. Let's bring in former Ted Cruz campaign and GOP pollster Chris Wilson to talk about this alongside Joel Rubin, as a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama. Welcome both. I found it interesting, Chris, to start with you as the pollster, to hear Mr. Johnson at the end of that say, hey, despite what the polls say, because head-to-head the president doesn't fare that well against certain candidates, Joe Biden and others, but Johnson says, no, it's his to lose. What do you say?
Well, I think he's right. As long as the economy continues to go well, as long as middle-class wages continue to be up, as long as there are more jobs to be filled than there are people looking for work, then yes, it is the president's to lose. Historically, we look at a president, a good economy like this is going to be reelected. And I think that is really where Johnson's coming from, is looking at it from an economic standpoint, and he's exactly right. And that's kind of what I've been saying on your network for the last year. As the economy continues to hum along, President Trump is in good shape for reelection.
You know, we've done a lot of these stories, Joel, where we look at a kind of, as Chris alludes to, kind of a generic candidate in this position, right? An incumbent running on a strong economy. And, you know, Chris is right. Almost every single time that person wins. Now, Mr. Johnson does take time in his comment to talk about the candidates he'll be running against, saying none of the Democrats are, quote, enough in the center to beat him. So what do you say?
Well, clearly, Mr. Johnson has a bias. He wants a centrist candidate, and that's not really where the base primary voters for the Democratic Party are right now, and we're seeing that time and again. Yep. But I also want to point out that the same conditions that we have now, in many ways we had in 2018, and Democrats earned nearly 10 million more votes in the House elections overall as a cumulative amount.
But in a presidential year, if I could just stop you for one second, Joel, to say that's not where the base is, I get it. But isn't that the issue? Isn't that the issue when you go into a general? If the base is too far to the left, they pick the wrong candidate who can't win? Or?
You certainly don't want to have a candidate who's so boxed in on their issues that they can't pivot in the general. And for example, black voters who are tracking this very closely and are a critical constituency, they're more centrist in many ways, and they're trending towards Joe Biden right now and away from Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. And we'll see, they also play a major role in the swing states for the general election. So the candidates are going to have to speak to both parties, both sides of it, but we're going to have motivated voters as well. And at the end of the day, that is the base. And just as President Trump, he's motivating his base to try to turn them out at a maximum level in order to win.
Now, that does bring up a larger point. Talking about the African-American voters and who they'll support in the Democratic primary allows us, Chris, to transition and talk about that side of the race a little bit. The candidate who's been surging in the polls in the first two states, Iowa and New Hampshire, is the candidate who's seen to be struggling with that group in Mayor Pete Buttigieg. In fact, there's some new reporting out. There's a Politico article that talks about the surge of Mayor Pete and how he might go against the other candidates in the race. And it quotes, among others, Bakari Sellers, who's was a legislator in South Carolina, and I should point out is backing Kamala Harris. He's backing Kamala Harris for president, but he said this about Buttigieg: Pete can win Iowa and New Hampshire, and he won't win South Carolina or do well with black voters here or do well on Super Tuesday. If someone wants to tell you Pete Buttigieg is Barack Obama, they're blatantly ignorant of facts. Pete's biggest problem: no connection, no relationship with the African-American community. So there's been a lot of attention, guys, on Mayor Pete. Chris, you first. What do you say about that and these comparisons with Obama?
Well, I think Bakari's exactly right. It's really it's a false comparison, and I do believe that he's also correct that Buttigieg is likely at this point to win Iowa and New Hampshire. It's going to be a fascinating scenario from a political science standpoint to see a candidate who wins Iowa and New Hampshire and then goes into really the Super Tuesday primaries with an inability to win black voters. And there's so many reasons for this. It is his comments that have just really come to light about 2011, comments about there's no minority role models, which is now being panned as racist paternalism. And the fact that, let's face it, he is a married gay man, and with a constituency of African Americans who are the least likely of the Democratic Party to embrace gay marriage. Less than 50% of them do. And I think all those things factor into it, that he is not the candidate that you're going to see African Americans get behind in the South.
Joel, quick final point on this, please.
Yeah, I mean, black voters matter. They're the critical constituency heading into the South Carolina primary, but also in the general election. They can determine the outcome in many of the swing states, be it in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Right. And he has a lot more work to do there, self-admittedly, in order to capture those votes.
All right, we'll keep following it. Good discussion, guys. Joel and Chris, good to see you both. Thanks for coming on.